Welcome to the Lean Blog Podcast. Visit our website at www.leanblog.org. Now, here's your host, Mark Grogan.
Hi, this is Mark Grogan. Welcome to episode 224. It's June 15th, 2015. My guest today is Mike Grogan. He's a returning guest. About 2 years ago, he was on the show in episode 182. We were talking about the work he was doing at the time in Tanzania, teaching and coaching lean in healthcare in a clinic there. Really interesting story of Mike's, and you can go to leanblog.org/182 to find that episode. But today, we're talking about a number of things, including how Mike's work wrapped up in Tanzania. He's moved on and is doing some other things. But we're going to talk about mentoring, the mentoring relationships that he had in Tanzania, what he learned about mentoring, what he learned about lean and about himself along the way. Were there any mentoring failures that he's experienced? And then Mike had suggested that we have as much of a conversation about mentoring as just an interview instead of an interview. So Mike had asked me to share some of my reflections about being mentored, about mentoring. I think it's a good conversation. It's about a 50-minute episode today, so I know it's a bit long, but hopefully it's helpful, and we would love to hear what you have to say about mentoring. If you'd like to leave a comment or share your story, come to the website when you can, leanblog.org/224. Would love to hear from you. And as always, thanks for listening. Well, Mike, it's great to talk to you again, and I want to thank you for being a returning guest on the podcast. Thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure, Mark. Thank you.
So it's been, I can't believe it's been over 18 months, almost 20 months since we talked for the podcast episode 182. And I would encourage people maybe to go back and listen to that episode, leanblog.org/182, where we talked about your work in Tanzania. And I was wondering if you could kind of, recap, I guess, what's happened since then. You've wrapped up your work there, if you can give listeners kind of an update into what's been happening.
Sure. Well, it's an extremely exciting time for CCBRT. That's the healthcare organization that I worked for 2 years in Tanzania. I have since left, so I spent a total of 2 years as the full-time lean coach there. And they are continuing to pursue on their lean journey. So it gives me, I look back with extraordinary pride of what the organization has done in initiating the journey and how it's continued to pursue it. So in terms of my role there, I guess I had two primary roles. I was to initiate the transformation and ensure that when I left, which has happened now, that it will continue to grow without me there. And I'm delighted to see that it will continue to grow. So they've hired a full-time replacement and a man that I believe is going to achieve even greater things than I. They have formed relationships with lean coaches from around the world, in particular the Thedicare Center for Healthcare Value. We currently, right now as we speak, there's a lean coach from Lehigh Valley volunteering there, and they've redesigned the organization, so they now have a dedicated team made up of 5 people that is supporting the lean initiative. So it gives me extraordinary pride to see how much they've really taken this to heart and that they are serious about using lean thinking to grow the organization.
Well, that's great to hear, and kind of alludes to what our main topic is going to be later on. The idea of mentoring, that I think great coaches or consultants or mentors set people up to be successful. You're teaching them how to fish, if you will. So curious if you have any thoughts about what your approach was over your 2 years there to set them up to be able to continue.
Sure. I guess I've been doing it. I've spent 2 years there. I recently finished about 5 weeks ago, and I've been reflecting on, of course, the obvious questions: what went well and what didn't go so well. But if we're to highlight the things that did go well, it was some of the mentoring that I was directly involved with. In particular, I recently wrote an article about Dr. Brenda DeMello. So me and Dr. Brenda, we were together on our previous podcast, Mark.
Right.
So our relationship is something, our work relationship, that it was extremely effective in seeing her grow into becoming probably the organization's leading lean thinker, in my opinion. So I have done a lot of reflection on mentoring. Was a key fundamental element of the lean transformation in CCBRT for sure.
Now, how would you summarize some of the results, at least, for those first 2 years? What improvements were made? Were they measurable performance improvements in certain dimensions?
Sure. I always look at results from two categories, which of course are interlinked, and that's the visible results, the measurable piece, and the invisible results. So to talk about some of the visible results that are achieved, numerous small improvements were initiated across the organization. So to give an example, I've seen teams reduce cycle times of documentation process by 50%. I've seen teams work on safety initiatives to reduce the risk of nurses getting infected in the removal of hospital waste. I've seen other teams significantly improve reporting times. So CCBRT is, of course, a healthcare organization in Africa and has got about 40 donors, partners around the world that are helping their efforts. And of course, they need to be accountable to their services, so they complete these reports. So that reporting process, I've seen teams significantly, in one case by 3 or 4 days, just take out the non-value added waste in that process, so they can spend their time on more effective things. So many visible wins and measurable wins were documented and achieved in the organization over 2 years.
Well, that's great, and it kind of goes to show the power of lean, this sort of balanced set of objectives, where I think sometimes people think, lean, I hear people say this, lean is only about cost, or that it's only about flow, and you described what I always kind of point out as the two main pillars. It's about improving flow or reducing cycle time, and improving quality and safety at the same time. And if you do that, cost reduction follows. So I'm glad to hear that you took that broader, kind of more balanced view, if you will, right?
Yes, I'm very fortunate that I had support and mentorship myself to help me with my own thinking. Because just like many of our listeners, in my early days on my own lean journey, I was still grasping what lean, and even still today, still truly grasping what is the real meaning of lean, what is about. Because I know there's a lot of companies who totally incorrectly look at this as cost cutting, which is fundamentally wrong, and it's not going to give you the long term benefits that real lean can.
In working with Dr. Brenda, let's maybe transition to talking about how some of those results and the immeasurable benefits, which I agree, it's not always measurable. In working with Dr. Brenda, maybe talk about the approach that you took with mentoring. This is something, and I'll link to this in the show notes. You wrote a nice piece together with her on the Planet Lean website about mentoring. So maybe can you describe in general what was the approach that you took? How did you establish that mentoring relationship with her?
Okay, so maybe just to give our listeners just an idea how far Brenda developed as a lean thinker. When John Toussaint from the Healthcare Center came to visit us for a week, he only spent 10 or 15 minutes with Brenda talking about, Brenda explaining to him the work that she has been doing in continuous improvements. And then later that day, our CEO asked John, in terms of how can the organization grow further, essentially looking for John's advice. And John turned our CEO and said, how can we make more Dr. Brendas? And that was just from his very brief observation to see that how she's developed into a lean thinker. And it makes me extraordinarily proud that I had a small piece to play in that. So Brenda is, and I state this in the article, and our listeners can hear her voice in episode 182, but she's, long before she heard of me or heard of lean, she's an extraordinary individual. She is a total she's an outlier and an amazing woman to work with.
Yeah.
I've never in my life met someone so passionate for the mission of the work she is doing, and not just the mission of the organization, but almost at a higher level in her own calling on this mission. So to explain the work that we're doing here, well, in particular that Brenda is doing, not necessarily me, but it's reducing maternal and newborn death rates within Tanzania. So Tanzania, unfortunately, has got one of the highest death rates for mothers in the world. Shocking statistics. I won't go into the detail, but 154 women every week are estimated to die in the healthcare facilities and outside the healthcare facilities during childbirth or as a result of mismanagement childbirth. So to see Brenda so passionately committed to that work, it was extraordinarily inspiring for me to say to myself, what can I do to set this woman up for success? How can I help this woman, this hero who's in the front line? How can I help her become more effective and efficient? Mm-hmm. So essentially that was the question that motivated me throughout this journey with Brenda.
Yeah. Well, let me just interject for a second. Sorry, but no, I think you raise a really important point where I think as a mentor, there's got to be some connection that pulls you in, because mentoring is an investment of time, and you're building a relationship with someone that you're mentoring. And yeah, I think, and maybe this sounds really obvious, but it's got to be something you want to do. I think a lot of corporate mentoring, for example, is maybe like, well, you've been assigned to mentor somebody. There's not that sense of connection that you described so nicely about, you're meeting Dr. Brenda. It seemed like that, it's somebody you were impressed with and you want to help them. And it's just kind of as we have done in kind of our pre-reflection before this podcast, I've been thinking about, well, I think the people I'm mentoring are people that in some way that I care about. And I think that's important.
Oh, I 100% agree, Mark. I 100% agree.
So sorry, I didn't mean to sidetrack you from.
No. Thank you for that introduction. That was a good observation. So it was definitely connection I believe, in my opinion, the secret ingredient, if you will, to successful mentoring relationships. So to go back to your original question in terms of what did it look like, well, it took over the 2 years. It took various. It looked like, how do I say, from one-on-one to observing her, so one-on-ones discussing pressing problems, to actually go into the facilities with her and to see how she works with her other colleagues, to see her lead team meetings, mm-hmm. and to spend many conversations both inside of work and outside of work, reflecting together. I always was hesitant of the label mentor, because it kind of, well, I really feel, and I to this day, that I've learned more from this woman than I have given back to her. And I feel that it was co-learning together. Mm-hmm. Her empathy and passion and commitment and humility and hunger to learn was something I so admire that I could see myself improving as not just a professional, but as a human being. Yeah. I could see myself growing because I'm spending time with this amazing woman. So it was definitely, even though I get the label of mentor and she gets the label of mentee, it was co-learning, 100% co-learning.
Yeah, and I agree. That I think of, there's somebody that I've had kind of an ongoing mentoring relationship with, a friend of mine from a children's hospital, and he reached out and initiated the idea. So I'd like you to mentor me, and so we do a phone call about once a month, and we have these ongoing discussions. But one of my reflections, like you said, is that I think the best mentoring relationships are mutual mentoring, mutual learning, where you're able to give feedback to each other, and it's not just kind of I don't know, top down. Passing on my wisdom to the mentee. You learn things, I think, directly from that person who's asked you to mentor them, and you're learning about yourself. I think if you're reflecting, like, am I asking good questions? Am I giving thoughtful feedback? Am I, I think one of the things I try to avoid through mentoring, and a lot of my paid consulting is more like mentoring than anything. I try to step back and say, wait a minute, I'm fighting that habit of giving of giving people answers. And say, wait a minute, I'm giving them answers instead of asking them to think. And and I learn about some of my own thought patterns and habits just in the course of doing that mentoring. So I agree that that mutual learning is probably the ideal situation. That's one of the things that adds energy to keep a mentoring relationship going, I think.
Yes, I would 100% agree with you. It's always has to be win-win. It's never just one-way street. That's definitely not mentoring if that's the case.
Yeah. So I'm curious, did you have other reflections, any thoughts looking back now at that mentoring relationship? Are there things that you would have done differently?
Yes. So Brenda was my outlier. So she was my most successful working relationship of my career. And when I looked at the success that I've had with Brenda, or in terms of Brenda developing into this lean and continuously developing into this amazing leader, I started to obviously reflect on where I've worked with leaders but not been able to get to that level of success. So there has been gaps in my own ability to reach the potential I could have had with other leaders, both when I worked in the US and of course recently in Tanzania. So I have a few observations. Of course, we kind of smile. We don't say the word failure, but there is gaps in terms of, I wish I could have done that better. For example, I really believe that sometimes that I didn't have the courage to give these leaders the feedback they needed to hear. And I would highlight that as an example of me not showing them respect. Respect for people is about giving this topic that's talked about, but an example of it is when the feedback is needed to be given and to give the feedback, even though if it's not feedback they may want to hear. And I in the past, I can think of occasions where I have not had the courage to give the feedback. So that's one of the things that I look back in terms of my own gaps. And other gaps would include not connecting more. What made me and Brenda successful, we connected so much. I get to know the person behind the title of manager. Mm-hmm. So whatever job title they are in the organization, who is that person behind it? What is their hopes? What is their dreams? What is their fears? What is their passions? Getting to know that person. And I feel many times that I went straight to business, went straight to shop talk without actually that human touch piece.
No, I think that's an important reflection of getting to know the person. I think that's one of those things that, again, I think sustains the mentoring relationship. Where I think about Brian, who's the guy that I have these roughly monthly phone calls with, and we've been doing this for a couple of years. The fact that we do chat and catch up, and we're not close friends, but I think we know each other and our personalities well enough where it's not just transactional, that the connection to the person. I think for one, it's important to understand the whole person. I think that's part of respect. W. Edwards Deming in his books talked about psychology and the need for managers to understand their individual employees and to treat them as individuals. I think that's important. For the mentoring relationship is not just technical questions like, I'm trying to calculate the size of a Kanban bin. Am I using the right formula? Like that's not mentoring, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I see myself, when I look back in the past, of having fallen for that trap. Like I remember, for example, one of my colleagues came late to a meeting, and they're obviously in a distressed state. And the first question I give to them is, okay, here's what you missed out on the meeting. Rather than ask, hey, was everything okay? It turns out there was a traffic accident. They weren't involved, but they were stuck on the highway. But just that's one tiny example of ways to actually just, care more about how the people are than what they're doing.
Well, and I think I'm reminded also of the TWI, training within industry approach, where the first step in sitting and training somebody is, to put that person at ease. And maybe that's a good tip also for mentoring, to make sure, like you said, if somebody is in, a frazzled, stressed out state of mind, maybe you decide to, well, for one, either to talk about that and be there for that person, or maybe the decision is, well, let's reschedule our mentoring until one or the both of us are in, a calmer state of mind, perhaps, right?
Exactly. And that's where I've missed in the past. So what I learned from, I think, from Stephen Covey, there's a time to teach and there's a time not to teach. And it's wisdom knowing the difference. And a lot of the times where the time was not right to give feedback, or the time was not right to have a teaching moment, and you open up your mouth, and exactly as you said, step back. Hey, now's not the time. And many examples.
Yeah. Now, looking back, let me ask you a different question. Looking back in your own career, and I'm willing to reflect on this too. And for the listeners, normally I interview my guests and I try to have them do all the talking. Mike had suggested in advance, let's have this be more of a conversation. And, so he asked me to share some reflections too. But the question I would have for you, Mike, is, in your own career and, in earlier steps along the way, who's been an effective mentor to you? How was that helpful? What are some of your reflections about the things that they did that led them to be effective mentors for you?
Oh, it's a great question. I think two guys jump out of my mind straight away. Eric Hager, who's a former Toyota guy. I'm so blessed that for 2 years Eric poured into me and really helped me deeply understand what real lean was about. And another mentor of mine, Gordon Jonas, actually, it's one of my motivations for doing this podcast is for Gordon, because unfortunately Gordon passed away tragically too soon at the end of last year. And he really, as someone who poured into me as a mentor, kind of really made me reflect on, okay, how can I possibly thank my mentors for the so many people, even going back as far as my parents, my educators as a youth, so many people who have blessed us with their knowledge, their wisdom. How is the best way to pay them back? I think there's not enough words in our language to say thank you, but for the mentors that are both living and have passed away, I personally believe that the best thing that we can do is to pass on the torch. The secret to living is giving. To kind of how your mentors poured into you, Mark. Possibly the best way you can express your gratitude to them is probably not with all our thank you letters, which it is appreciated, but really it is seeing them grow and seeing them pass on the teachings, pass on the knowledge, wisdom to the next generation, if we want to be dramatic. And when people ask me my proudest moment in my career, it's not been mentoring Brenda per se, it's watching Brenda mentor others. I know that for my mentors in particular, Gordon and Eric, who've poured into me, I know what makes them proud will be me passing on what they learned to me and see me grow as a professional. So that's something that I learned from my mentors of what really is important.
Yeah, and Eric was with Toyota in Cambridge, Ontario. Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah. How did you cross paths with him? Because you weren't working there. You were working in Philadelphia previously, right?
Yes. So I worked with Merck & Company for about 8 years in the UK and the US. So Merck, just like a lot of big pharmaceutical companies and a lot of big multinationals, they're trying to figure out what this lean thing is. So I'm smiling here, not to be disrespectful to my former employer, but they hired in some great consultants from Toyota and from other world-class companies. And I feel one of the best things that happened to my career journey is to have someone, not just Eric, there's been a few others, with a deep understanding of what TPS, what real lean is about. And I was chosen. I feel kind of spiritual now, but I was one of the few folks that was chosen to be mentored by Eric, and that's something that's fundamentally this day changed my thinking.
Well, that's great to hear. And no, back to your chuckle about big companies still trying to figure this out. I chuckled the other day. I was at a lean startup event in Austin, and Eric Ries was talking about lean startup, and he made a comment about the roots of lean thinking that's now in the startup space. The roots being in lean manufacturing and Toyota, and kind of honoring and recognizing the people we've all learned from and been inspired by. And Eric does a great job of saying, hey, I didn't invent all this. It comes from Toyota, but he made a comment. It made me chuckle a bit. He said something like, "Well, yeah, in manufacturing, these ideas were at one time seemed crazy, but now it's been fully accepted and everyone's lean." And I'm thinking, "Oh no, dude, not really. Not really." If I'd been on a panel with them, there would have been a good chance for me to jump in. But I think it's easy to overstate that. This has become the new norm in manufacturing, and we're not just picking on any one manufacturing company here. It's still a challenge, and there's still a need for people like Eric, or mentoring, learning, helping people figure out what lean means as we all continue to figure it out, right?
Exactly, and that's all around the world. Even the Philippines, where I'm living now, I see total misconception of what this is about, and that's the norm. Yeah. So there's a lot of more work to do.
Yeah. But I'm thinking back. When you talk about people who mentored you, I was kind of just recalling, people that I worked with. It's going to be 20 years ago now that I graduated from college and started working at General Motors. And for all the things that I could criticize about General Motors in 1995, I had some amazing mentors within General Motors. Some of them were people that GM had hired in from Toyota suppliers to try to kind of to teach about lean. And then I was also mentored by I think back there was one guy, Glenn, who was probably in his 50s, and he had been a production supervisor at GM for the longest time, but I think he had been exposed to some of the Deming thinking, and he was definitely different than the other production supervisors, and he mentored me a lot, not just about, well, here are the things that we're trying to do, but here's what you need to understand about the 30-year history of this place we're working in. And he always did it in a respectful way. It was never like, hey Mark, you young punk, let me but he was trying to be very helpful, and so that mentoring was incredibly helpful. And then I had another mentor in the plant who had graduated from the Leaders for Manufacturing program at MIT, and he mentored me a lot. And while I thought about, I knew I wanted to go back to grad school. I grew up in the Midwest, and MIT would have probably just never been on my radar. I wouldn't have thought about it, or I would have thought, I can't get into MIT. And I think part of his mentoring was, so I think back to Glenn was teaching me and helping me understand how that place worked and how I could navigate it. And so the guy Steve did a lot of that and teaching me about lean. But I think he also played, I think this is an important role for a mentor. He opened my eyes to new possibilities. And he told me about MIT, and he said, I think you should look into that program. I think you can do it. You would really thrive there. And so, there was that positive push to try to get me to do something I might not have thought of, or might not have thought was possible. So I think maybe that's another really important role of a mentor.
Absolutely. When sometimes I challenge in some of the classroom trainings I do on this subject. I ask people the question, okay, look back, write down the names of people from your career, even from your childhood, that have poured into you. What do you want to call them? Teachers or mentors. But what comes out, the common element in each one of the relationships is you knew that that person cared about you.
Yes.
And it links me back to that quote from John Maxwell or Theodore Roosevelt. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to make an assumption here. I want you to verify that if you look back at your mentors that poured into you, just like I look back, one thing that they have all in common, I knew without doubt that they did care for me.
Yes.
And that had a huge impact when I pass on that care, and it becomes co-care. We both, for example, talking about Brenda, I cared about her development, and in turn she cared about me, and it was really it's just something beautiful to see evolve. And it really my big learning point that the real heart of Lean is respect for humanity, is respect for people, is care for people. That is the absolute heartbeat of Lean.
Yeah, and we talk about the manager as coach and teacher, that's a really important piece of that. And even thinking back to GM and people who mentored me, somebody is you have a manager, and that manager may or may not be a mentor. I've had managers who are mentors. I've had some managers who were not. So the company assigns them to be the manager. They have to choose to be a mentor.
Yes, that's a very good distinction.
And someone can choose to be a mentor even if they're not a manager. And I think back to those GM days. There was a executive who was fairly high up in GM Powertrain who had come to the plant and was doing kind of special projects in education. This was really more around theory of constraints and the Ellie Goldratt stuff. And we crossed paths, and he took an interest in me, and like you said, I mean, I was impressed that somebody, he was a great mentor, and we've still kept in touch. He chose to take interest in me. He chose to care when he didn't have to, and I think that's it's just that makes you feel good when somebody is willing to do that for whatever their reasons are, right?
Yes, it does make you feel very blessed, and it almost creates this I'm not going to let this person down mentality.
Yeah,
I know when I kind of can imagine. Well, I'll just make an assumption for you that when you saw that this guy actually, even though there was no direct reporting relationship, the fact that it motivated you even more to kind of really apply some of the material that he was teaching you.
Yeah, and then he asked me to help teach him. When I went to MIT, he asked for he wanted to learn at least summaries or high level. It's not like he was creating additional homework for me, but he was I think sincerely interested in what I was learning at MIT and what were the topics, and it was an opportunity for me to try to give back, and it was sincere interest, and but I think it was that opportunity for some mutual learning.
Exactly.
But one other thought that comes to mind, I think you and I have agreed here that somebody has to choose to be a mentor. I think at the same time someone also has to choose or give permission to be mentored, to be the mentee. So I'm curious, to hear some of your thoughts about, let's say, whether it's Dr. Brenda allowing you to mentor her or others you've worked with. How do you think that's part of the dynamic?
I've got a controversial opinion on this that I want to share with you. So my opinion is that the mentor should take 100% responsibility for the relationship. So that they should create the circumstances for the mentee to give permission. So the reason I'm so insistent on that, because I've seen, myself included, I've pointed myself first, and others blame the mentee rather than look at themselves. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to steal the phrase that Eric and others in Toyota use, if the teacher hasn't taught, the student hasn't learned. Or my favorite, there's no such thing as a bad student, only bad teacher. And I've just seen so many times where let's say educators, let's call us, have just say, well, no, that's the student's fault. Whether that be in our children's education or whether it be in healthcare, in manufacturing, in manager relationships, where we blame the person rather than kind of looking at ourselves. So my mindset is to focus on self. And I think that, and the mentor, will lead to more effective outcomes in creating the conditions where the mentee will give permission and open up. Mm-hmm. So I wonder, what's your thoughts on?
Well, I mean, I definitely agree. I hear what you're saying about, the idea of, the teacher has responsibility to make sure the student can learn. If the student's not getting it, maybe you're not explaining it well. Maybe you're not setting context. Maybe you're not helping them learn on their own, as opposed to you just throwing information at them. I'm with you. I think let me talk through two scenarios. You're helping me think through this. One thing that I've tried to do, not to the extent that you have, and I'm probably embarrassing you here, but I deeply admire the fact that that you spent 2 years working in Tanzania. I've never done anything to that level of commitment, but I have tried to give back by doing pro bono work, consulting or mentoring with a couple of different nonprofit organizations. And I think of I'm a fairly consistent variable in two different attempts at this. One was a organization in Fort Worth where I lived previously, where we kind of discovered an opportunity where this organization had a formal quality policy that they needed for their nonprofit accreditation, and in this policy it said all the things that we would kind of recognize as continuous improvement. And we were talking about this and discovered this opportunity where they didn't know how to make that goal a reality, and I had some things that I could teach and help them with. And so we discovered that connection. They invited me in, and I worked with people. I did some training. I coached them. Kaizen as a methodology has sort of taken off and spread through the organization, and I've kept in touch with them. And there's been a pretty good mentoring relationship where I think part of it is them making the effort to reach out, and this is where I think maybe it's a little bit different. And feel free to challenge me back on this. I think there's a difference between teacher learner and mentoring, where I've had a different situation here in San Antonio where got introduced to somebody at say a free healthcare clinic, had a couple of really wonderful discussions with the executive director of this group, of wanting to learn, of going with me to Toyota with a group of healthcare students, and she was putting some effort into it, but then there was some more detailed work around process improvement and things where she was sort of trying to hand me off to somebody who worked for her, and I came in and met with her, and frankly, like I tried following up, and at some point I just basically gave up, and my conclusion was, well, I guess for whatever reason they either don't want the help or they don't think I'm the person to help them. They're not giving me permission to mentor. So at some point it's like, well, what can I do? I gave up. Do you think I'm wrong, or what are your reactions to that?
Well, I'm not going to say you're wrong, Mark, because obviously.
Well, if you think I'm wrong, here's a chance to give me that, to be courageous and give me that feedback. I'm often wrong, so I know I'm honestly curious what you think. Did I give up too easily, or what I'm giving you a glimpse into the situation.
Yes, so that was a good description of the circumstance that you found yourself in. So let me give feedback based on the other extreme. So I give the other end of the spectrum. My initial comment was there's no such thing as a bad student, only bad teacher. However, in the other spectrum, there is a limitation to our influence. Mm-hmm. So I forget which famous politician, it could have been Abraham Lincoln, that said in terms of the limits of our influence, that the person that you want to develop, you desperately want to see grow, or you a lot of the times you're not the right person at the right time for that person. No matter what, you could be the world's greatest sensei, all the lean wisdom poured in between your ears, but it doesn't work because you're not the right person at the right time. And in a way, you're kind of doing injustice to that person by kind of pushing, knowing that there's a limit. So for a practical example, maybe from the corporate world. So I guess I'm still in my early 30s. So for me there's a limitation how I can advise a senior executive, just because of my limits in my experience, and also because of maybe there could be cultural reasons. So you could have the knowledge, you could have the wisdom, but because of you did not have the context, it almost not disqualifies you, but there's a limit to who you can influence. And having that awareness and realizing, actually, no, I'm not going to pursue this person is a strength to have as a mentor as well.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but there is, I think my single observation, there's certain people that Mark Graban can't get to, just like there's certain people Michael Grogan can't get to.
Sure.
And maybe the example you gave was one of them for whatever reason.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that it's probably a matter of circumstances, or maybe I didn't articulate clearly enough how I thought I was able to help, but well, I guess I'll keep reflecting on that. But as we start to wrap up here, we had one other topic we're going to talk about. You had some thoughts about some practical tips that you thought would be helpful for people who are trying to be better mentors, if you want to share those.
Yes. So I'll share. I think I've got 3 that I'd like to share. My top 3, and I would also like to hear your thoughts on this, Mark, since it's a dual conversation. So number 1, which I've already touched on before, but it really is that personal statement, commitment from the mentor to say, I will take 100% responsibility for this relationship as far as I go. If it's not working, the first place I look is within me. Just like if you're trying to share an idea with them and they're not getting it, you don't jump to the conclusion, oh, they're idiots. No, you first, okay, wait a second, how did I describe that? So it's all internal reflection before you start questioning if they're the right person for you to be mentoring. So number 1 is take 100% responsibility for the relationship. Number 2 is feedback. There was a Ken Blanchard who said feedback is the breakfast of champions. So I've learned so much from just asking colleagues feedback on how I'm performing. So I'll give 2 options of questions, 2 sets of questions people can ask. So in order to get this feedback, one is what I learned from Jack Canfield. He was the author of the Success Principles. So his one was, go to the person and say, out of 10, how would you rank our relationship? Or out of 10, how would you rank my performance as a mentor this last quarter? And essentially, they would give you their score. Let's say they give you a mark of 7. And then your counter will be, okay, what would it take for me to get a 10? Mm-hmm. So just 2 simple questions. And you can ask that not just in terms of professional, but you can ask that to your wife, to your business partner, to your family members.
It sounds like if you're familiar with Net Promoter Score, that there's the idea here of the Net Mentor Score. But where you can only extend that so far, because that question is, would you recommend me to others? And I want my wife to keep me instead of recommending me to others. But I know what you mean. Like, kind of on a scale 1 to 10. How are we doing? What can I do better? That's always important feedback and discussion to have.
Exactly, yeah. So feedback has been, because the eye can't see the eye. There's certain behaviors that I do that I'm not aware is effective or ineffective, or in some cases insulting to people. So regularly asking feedback has been very powerful for me. And of course, there's another way to phrase the same question is, if you were me, what would you do differently? Yeah. It just is such an empowering question for the other person. If you set it up in the right way. Yeah. We could have a separate podcast about how to deliver feedback and how to receive and give, etc. And my last point, number 3, in the spirit of what your whole podcast series is about, it's Kaizen, continuously, constant, never-ending improvements. And for me, how I've learned a lot about mentoring is actually, reading what's out there and what listening to podcasts. I've listened. Okay, I'm going to embarrass you now, Mark, but I probably listened to over 100 of your podcasts over the last probably 3 years. That when I made this commitment, I want to learn as much about this subject as I possibly can. And I haven't been sitting down and just listening to them. It's always been while I'm driving, when I'm cooking, when I'm exercising. So constantly, and reading great novels out there on lean, whether it be from John Shuck's Managing to Learn, some of Michael Ballet's work. I love the way he does the novel, Lead with Respect, etc. Of course, your books. There's just so much wisdom out there that all we have to do is go and get. Success leaves clues, as Tony Robbins says, and there's so much wisdom, whether it be in video format, podcast format, or book format, for individual mentors, people who care about other people's developments, to go out there and to unlock this massive amount of wisdom that can really significantly help them make their mentoring relationships far more effective.
Well, I think those are great tips. I know you were going to kind of turn that back on me. I don't know how much more I have to share other than what I've already shared, but I'm going to do a blog post. Maybe I'll leave it with the teaser here. I'm going to be writing a blog post together with Brian, talking about the two sides of our mentoring relationship, and so maybe I'll be able to reflect on that more and write something instead of speaking. So I think we'll go ahead and wrap up here today. But Mike, this has been a great discussion. Let's do this again on another theme, or I think there's, like you said, there's so much more we could delve into, such as how to give feedback, and maybe we can find another topic to do something similar on. But for people who are listening, if they want to reach you and find you online, what's the best way for people to reach out if they have questions or stories or reflections they want to share?
Yeah, I would welcome folks to reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm actually based in the Philippines. I'm making this call from Ireland right now. I'm visiting my family, but I am living full time in the Philippines now. So folks can reach out to me on LinkedIn, on my website, which MikeGroganConsulting.com, and I would love to see any way that I can help our listeners, because in a way I really believe, and I think, Mark, we're aligned here, that the secret to living is giving. That I can get everything I want in life if I can just help enough people get what they want. And that's why I'm so passionate about mentoring, so passionate about what the lean is so effective at human development. And the more we learn from us, the more we can give, and the more we'll have quality of life and make a huge impact on this world that I believe desperately needs it.
Well, great point to end on. So, Mike, again, great talking to you. Thanks for the work that you've done and for sharing that. Fascinating reading, the Plant Lean article, everything else you've done, and more importantly, thank you for being part of a great conversation today.
My pleasure, Mark. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening. This has been the Lean Blog Podcast. For lean news and commentary updated daily, visit www.leanblog.org. If you have any questions or comments about this podcast, email Mark at leanpodcast@gmail.com.